Hello, the other day on stream I was asked to make a tier list for all the runes in IS4. I thought about it, but I don't like a tier list for the Foldartals, which will just cow runes because Foldartal is a mouthful. So instead I'm just going to read through what all of them do, explain exactly when you want to use them and their relative value compared to each other. If you're new here and don't know how runes work for some reason, basically we have two types of runes. The ones which select a node, these control where the effect of the rune goes, and the second ones which actually control what the effect is. You combine two runes together to select something and then apply some kind of effect. If you have runes of the same color, you get an additional effect. There are also a couple of rainbow runes that have been added. In addition, any rune combination will reduce the collapse value in IS4 by 1, which controls your debuffs. Okay, let's get started on the runes themselves. There are two metrics you should keep in mind when valuing runes. First is how many nodes the rune actually affects, and second, how easy is it to actually get all of those nodes. For example, if you have something like Snow Priest, you actually need 3 combat nodes that you can reach to get all of its typical value. You might not actually get that all that often, so in practice it ends up being much closer to Warrior, where you get 2 fights out of it. Though it can be better, of course, if you can guarantee the 3 fights. Okay, starting from the top now. Select all next combat nodes. This selects all the nodes to the right. I believe they have to actually be properly connected for you to actually get any value, because otherwise you only get one actual fight from it, and in that case it's just the same value as a hunter rune. So this one is only better if you have vertical paths. Ideally you use it in a place where you want to take 3 fights with 2 vertical paths, but realistically it ends up being the value of 2 fights most of the time, because 3 vertical paths next to each other are very uncommon. Not a bad rune, but a lot of the time you end up just using it in 1 or 2 fights. Next is just the most basic one. Select one combat node of the player's choice. And basically you can just pick any one fight and apply this rune. This is the most basic combat rune. Most of the other ones also fulfill this, while also affecting other nodes. I would say that it's the best of the basic runes that only select one node, because being able to select fights is really important. On the higher floors, you might not want to do some emergency, and if you get stuck doing it, you can run into huge trouble. So being able to select the combat node and either apply some buff to help you, or use some removal skill like turning it into a shop, a safe house, is much higher value than something like select one encounter or non-combat node for that reason. Next, select one combat node and one random. So this is the hunter rune with an extra effect, where it picks one at random. You basically want to use this when you can limit the number of fights left. If there's only 2 fights left, you're guaranteed to get the effect. Or if there's 3 fights, but for example you can pick the fight you're forced to take, and then you can choose between the other 2. So you can always get both of the effects from this rune. It's a bit less value when you use it early on the floor, then it just becomes a hunter rune. And a lot of the time you just use it for one node. It's okay, you're obviously going to pick it over hunter, but in practice you get the same value most of the time. Shaman is mostly the same thing, but it affects 2 combat nodes. This is a bit better, since you can get quite a bit of value from that by combining it with something like the ingot rune, for example. But you just want to delay using it until you can guarantee hitting 3 fights with it, which with vertical paths isn't impossible, just takes a bit of planning. Snow Priest is kind of the same as Shaman. You just want to delay using it until you have 3 fights, because it randomly selects 3 combat nodes, and you don't want to rely on RNG. Unless you're desperate. It has a second effect. If declared while on a secret floor, randomly selects 3 nodes of any type instead. A secret floor is a boss key. So if you get a shop boss key, you can apply some buff, but that sounds like a waste of a combat rune to me, so I don't think I'd ever use that effect. And finally, the obviously best combat rune, select all combat nodes. You can do some pretty funny stuff with this, like you can just turn every fight on the floor into a shop, and then get some insane combo where selecting all combat nodes and such. Most of the time you won't get all of the runes to make some insane combo, so you might want to consider using this for something more basic. If you can get 4, 5, 6 fights on some floor, you might just want to burn this with, say, the ingot rune, and you get a ton of money. Like 40, 48 ingots, which is insane value for one rune combination. Of course, you should consider whether you have any other combat runes, because you still want to actually get your buffs from it. Next, we're moving to the green runes. Select one encounter of the player's choice. In my opinion, this is the single worst rune in the game, and the one which I will never pick if I have any choice in the matter. Simple reason for that is, first you can select a fight with it, which already makes it lower value than this. And then it's very specific that it can only be an encounter. You can select a shop, a safe house, a scout node. And the next rune here selects one non-combat node of the player's choice. It can do all of those things. This rune is pointlessly limited, and you don't get anything for that limitation. So this is just an outright worst version of the water rune. As for the water rune, I also don't like this one. You can use it to summon a shop, for example, or just get rid of some rune you don't have a plan for, like to get 8 ingots and 2 hope. But I don't really like using it much, because a lot of the green runes, like the love rune, the doubt rune, can remove fights. I really value removing fights, and I'd rather save them for that rather than just burning it. Sometimes you can use it with a shop on an encounter to get the discount, but the shop itself is a removal, so you might want to consider saving the shops. Floor 5 fights are really dangerous, and avoiding taking too many of them is always a good idea, unless you have an insanely strong run. This is my favorite green rune. Select the next node of the player's choice if there is more than one. So basically you can just pick the node in front of you. Sounds a bit limited, but the thing here is that it's a green rune, meaning it can combo at shop for the discount, and you can use it on a fight. So you can get the value of removing a dangerous fight and get a shop on top of it, and the discount. Just for that combo, this is my favorite green rune, since it's the only one that can actually do that. Now with the update, we got the rainbow runes, and this one can do the same thing. Select one node of the player's choice, always trigger a concord. This one is outright better now, because it fulfills the function that this rune uniquely had before. But I'll still take this one if I see it, because you can then end up using this rune for something else. Next we have Arch. Select one non-combat node of the player's choice and randomly select 2 non-combat nodes. This is one of my least favorite runes. It hits 3 non-combat nodes, yes, but that's very difficult to actually make use of in a lot of runes. You need a path that actually goes through 3 non-combat nodes. Consider that if you're on floor 2 or floor 4, you have wishes fulfilled at the end, several of them, and they can eat up the random thing. So it's only practically usable on floor 3, floor 5, and you then actually need enough encounters lined up so you can go through all of them. Realistically, it basically just turns into select one non-combat node and maybe one extra stage, 99% of the time. This is the same rune as Arch, it's just worse. Randomly select 3 non-combat nodes. It's just worse because you can't select one non-combat node. You get the same value if you have 3 non-combat nodes, but I hate this rune and I would never actively pick it if there is any other reasonable choice. If the other option is encounter, I'm going to pick it, because this one is ass. Unless I really need to summon the ending rune for something. Like say if I want to drop down a lost and found. Then I might pick an encounter just so I can properly get to it. And if I just need one lost and found for the ending, this can destroy other valuable nodes by turning them into lost and founds I don't need. So I think this is actually my least favorite rune. You can get value from it, but the floors are going to arrange in that way very rarely. Because you actually need to have 3 non-combat nodes. You need to have a rune that you can meaningfully combine with that to gain some actual value. Because obviously you can't use the combat runes, for example. Not a fan of it. Finally, Earth. This one is actually great, simply because you can use it to summon a bunch of shops. Since it selects all non-combat nodes, the most important part to me is that there isn't any RNG in it. If you see a path with 3 non-combat nodes, you just drop this rune, drop the shop, go through that path, you get 3 shops. It doesn't matter what the rest of the floor looks like. Which is something that this rune and this rune are not capable of doing. You might say you can safely use this on the 4th floor to summon a bunch of shops, but not these ones. Infinitely stronger rune. It has some insane combinations you can do at hero, where you turn all of the fights into non-combats and then use this to turn everything into shops. But those combos almost never come up. From my experience, you just use this to summon 2-3 shops and you gain the best value from it that way. There's going to be an instinct when you get really good runes like Hero and Earth to just try and save them forever to get that insane combo that wins the game. But since you're almost never going to get the chance for it, just consider when's your last point to use it. It's fine to save the rune until you need it, but at some point it's going to get wasted if you don't use it. There's no point in saving the rune after the boss fight. So for me, for example, I want to burn this rune on the 4th floor, or maybe late into the 5th floor, but usually the 4th. Because you can usually get some path with encounters, you can get an ending if you want with some of the runes, you can stock up on a bunch of shit. And since the 5th floor fights are really dangerous, I want to get the most power possible right before then. You can save it for the 5th floor if you're more confident with floor 5 fights than me, but personally I wouldn't recommend it. 4th floor seems like the ideal space for it. And now we're on the blue stuff. Select one node of any type and the player's choice. So this one is a bit weird. I basically consider it a worse combat rune, and mostly what I use it for is either to apply a buff when I don't care about the Concord effect, or to, for example, replace a node with something like a Lost and Found, or the Love rune. Sometimes if I have no other use for it, I'll combine it with Nest or Patrol to just gain their value. But I rarely look to pick that one. There are better blue runes. Next one is outright worse than the first one. Select one node of the player's choice with at least one node above or below it. What above or below it means is connected by a vertical path. So this is the same rune but outright worse because it has a condition. And Stone is actually pretty good. Randomly selects 2 nodes with at least one node above or below it. You might have noticed that I have been hating all of the randomly select nodes because they're unreliable. Stone is easy to control though. It's very easy to create a situation where you only have one vertical path left and can safely hit both the nodes on it. So it's very easy to get 2 nodes out of this rune. It's fairly common, so you end up using it a lot. And then you can gain some combo like this to gain 8 lives, or to gain 2 devices from it. You can use it with migration too, of course, but usually you're going to try and greed the migration for some instant win condition from one of the next runes. The next 3 blue runes are all great. Select all nodes that succeed the current node. What this means is it literally selects every node on the right side. They don't even have to be connected. This one is very powerful. If you have vertical paths, you can just apply the buff 3 times. It's one of the best migration runes to just summon a bunch of boss keys and then eat them all. It's a bit uncommon, you don't see it often, and it's a bit rare to actually get a situation where you can use it. So if you have this rune, you should be actively looking for a chance to use it. Like you're looking for a place with 2 vertical paths so you can go through all of the fights after. Pretty good rune. Since it's blue, you don't have the best combinations though, unless you gain Plunder or Migrate. Next we have Beast. This is another random rune. I kind of consider it weaker than Stone in one of the cases. But when you get next to the end of the floor, you have very limited tiles and then it rises up in value. Selects one node of the player's choice and randomly selects 2 other nodes. So you just want to hold on to it until the only nodes left are 3 in front of you and you can go through all of them. Just consider the vertical paths and you can gain the full value out of it. Most of the time I end up with situations where it's kind of RNG and I either get 2 or 3, So I'd say it's slightly higher than stone, but stone is more consistent and easier to use. Because there's usually vertical paths near the end of the floor, so when you try to use it, you end up with other options where the nodes can go that aren't directly in front of you. Basically, if you use it at the start of the floor, they can go all over the place. If you use it later in the floor, once you're committed to some isolated path, you can limit the choice of nodes, which removes the randomness factor. I will begrudgingly say it's better than stone, but I don't like using it. It feels unreliable. Being able to select one specific node without any restriction is always pretty good to have though. Sometimes you just need removal in an emergency to just get rid of some fight. So you should keep that in mind. It's worth picking just for that effect over something like stone. And finally, this is the best selection rune in the game, human. Selects one node of the player's choice and each node directly connected to it. So what this means, it selects the node you click on, the node behind it, and the node in front of it. It's possible to hit up to 6 nodes with this, though realistically you'll never be able to go through all 6. If you have this rune of human and migration, you just win. That's the ultimate combo. It will give you infinite resources from going through at least 3 boss keys at minimum. It's basically the instant win condition in IS4 because the value is so insane. Since it's very unlikely to actually get human plus migration, you might want to consider some other combinations you can do with it. With the other runes, but we'll discuss those once we go through it. Them a bit down. And then we have the rainbow runes. So this is just the best one node rune in the game because it works with any cover. You shouldn't be too concerned with saving it. It's not like you can get some insane extra value from it. It's just very easy to use and apply. Decent to have. You can use it to turn a combat node into shop. Next one I don't like because it's fully random, a bit worse than stone. Randomly selects 2 nodes, always trigger a concord regardless of the sources per team. So basically you just want to hold this until you have 2 nodes in front of you, so it actually goes where you want to. Or rather, you have nodes you can always reach. If the nodes are connected in such a way that you can definitely go through whatever 2 nodes it hits, but there's more than 2 nodes, that's fine too. You can still apply it then and get its full value. The Scar rune is for ending 2. You get it from the Lost and Found, and the benefit from it is that it can delete a fight. Usually I save it in me until the 5th floor or some really dangerous fight on the 4th floor, and just use it to get rid of the fight. Useful tech to have to the point where I sometimes consider picking it, even if I'm not doing ending 2, simply because the runes are useful. Removal is just something I value very highly. And next we get to the combat effects. Friendly units have their attack speed increased by 50 on the selected operation. Concord effect. Cheering sponsor drone will spawn on the selected operation. Those are the drones from MN that give you a bunch of attack speed when you kill them. This is probably the strongest combat rune. It gives you a bunch of attack speed, which massively increases your DPS, but I actually don't value the cheering sponsor drones all that much. Like, obviously it's an insane buff, you can gain crazy value, blah blah blah, but you have to know where the drones spawn on the map and time it relative to some enemy movements so you can actually use the buff properly. If you use the buff for nothing, it's kind of a wasted buff. It's easy to use on ending 1, for example, because the first drone lines up nicely and the second drone just AFKs in the corner, where you can kill it with something like Umbrio. Though I guess if you don't have Umbrio, it's really hard to reach it. Actually, for that reason, because they're a bit difficult to use, I don't value the Concord effect much, and most of the time I'm fine with just getting the attack speed. If I have the access to the Concord, I'll use it, obviously, but if, say, I have to pick between using a Concord on Silence and a Concord on Sync, I'll Concord Silence instead. Speaking of that, friendly units have their maximum health increased by 50% in the selected operation, and the Concord shield guards are present on the selected operation. So that summons the big bulky guys from chapter 7 to tank for you. Very convenient. You can consider this as a DP buff because they spawn block enemies and give you more time to deploy. They have taunt as well, which protects your ranged operators. Now this rune is one of those you very instinctively want to save for the boss, but I would actually advise against it to a point. If you run into some very dangerous fight that you're not sure you can win, and you have to use some buff to make sure you can make it through because you don't have removals. If you have to pick between Sing and Silence, always go with Silence. This is because on a lot of stages throughout the run, the way Shield Guards works is complete bullshit for the enemies. They can spawn on undeployable tiles, or some map just spawns 5 different Shield Guards, which can turn into ridiculous value very quickly. Like for example, if you use it on Altar of Craving, it's going to spawn a shield guard on the top lane, where you can't even deploy operators, and that will help you deal with the casters very easily. It's an insanely powerful rune, it's fine to save it for the ending as well, shield guards help deploy, the max health increase prevents one-shots, but if you need to burn a rune, I would recommend to go with this one. It's extremely powerful on a lot of maps simply because of the unique tiles shield guards can be dropped on. Next we have Recite. Gain 4 lives when entering the selected node. This means it heals you 4 lives, it doesn't increase your maximum lives. Big difference. Concord effects increases the max life point cap by 2 after the declaration. So if you're missing 4 lives, this can give you up to 6 lives with Concord. I very rarely end up using this rune for a few reasons. First of all, if you're leaking all the time, you're kind of just going to die. So I don't see too much value in it, especially on higher difficulty. Second, you're only going to have so much combat runes, and I feel like using it on this one to get the Concord effect for 2 extra lives is a bit of a waste. If I'm afraid of leaking and I want extra lives, unless I'm probably going to die the next fight, I'll use Nest instead, because it gives you objective shields. In a sense, objective shields are better than normal lives, because when you lose an objective shield, you don't increase the co-ops value. Whereas when you lose life normally, you gain even more co-ops, more debuffs, it makes the fights harder. You gain 2 less lives from this, because it increases the life point cap by 2 as well, but only gives 2 objective shields. But you should also consider that if you want to get the Concord, you don't have to waste a combat rune on that. You can use one of those blue runes like Beast, or Shroop, if you don't have anything better to use it for. Spend that rune and still have combat runes for removal and buffs later, which is why I vastly prefer using this over Recite if I have to choose between the two. Sometimes you're desperate and you're just trying not to die and you're gonna use it. It happens. So it's not like you should never use it, but it shouldn't be your first choice if you have other options. Next, this one I don't like, but that stems from me being a 4-star player. If somebody wants to argue it's more useful for higher rarity, I'll accept that. Friendly units have the redeployment time reduced by 30% of the selected operations. By 30% on the operation. Okay, so this is good for fast redeploys like Texas and Yato, you can spam them more. Though if you have the DPE debuff, you're gonna run into some issues. The Concord effect is you get a random elite operator. I assume this is very powerful early, because it's E2, and then falls off later, because the bunch of 6 stars you have will be stronger anyway. So it's hard to justify their DP cost. I think it's okay if you have a bunch of fast redeploys, or you know the map and you know you have to redeploy some operator. But I find I don't struggle with actually redeploying my shit. I don't have good fast redeploys that do a lot of damage with 4 stars, so I don't personally find any value in this rune. If I had to choose between using this or Silence or Sync, even if I am playing with Texas and Yato, which I don't even have leveled, I don't think I see a reason why I would pick the redeployment rune over the attack speed. But maybe I'm wrong since I don't have experience there, and you can gain some broken combo with them where you spawn them forever. I'll believe that, but outside of using fast redeploys, I don't think this is too valuable. Ideally, the way the maps are structured, you have time to redeploy your shit for whatever you need them, if you plan ahead properly. Next, gain 2 hope when entering the selected node. This is mostly garbage to me because I don't need hope. The Concord effect is that you gain 4 hope instead. I find this pretty useless because I don't need hope, but even beyond that, using a combat rune, they are a finite resource. I don't feel like this rune is worth it. If you're desperate for hope, you can use it, of course. If you don't have any other option, you can probably use it with something like Beast to gain 6 hope with as well. So you can get the value from it if you really need the hope. But you can get hope from items as well. And unless you're really desperate for it to avoid getting a new 3-star on the next fight, I'd probably not use this. Gain 2 lives for each selected node. This is the same as Recite. It heals you 2 lives, it doesn't give you 2 lives. The Concord effect is that it heals you 2 lives when entering the selected nodes. So this is really weird to me, because if you apply the Concord effect, then it's just outright worse than Recite. So let's say you apply it on 3 nodes, right? So you heal for 2 for each node applied, that's 6. You go through all of them, that's 6. 12 lives healed. If you apply Recite the same way, you heal for each node you go through, which is 12, and then you gain 2 lives on top of that. So this rune just seems like straight garbage to me. Even if you need healing, you probably won't Recite instead, since this one is in almost any circumstance going to be lower value. I guess the one exception of this is if you use it together with Hero. Select all combat nodes and then you can heal for a bunch. But you're very rarely going to both be missing that much health for that heal to actually be worth it. And also not be dead. So I don't see ever using this. Next we have Confess. Gain 1 life when entering the selected node. So this one is completely useless without a Concord effect. The Concord effect is insanely powerful though. Obtain a combat-related collectible when entering the selected node. What this means is you gain some buff for combat, like SP, damage, extra DP, some relic that affects in-game. Well, you know, in the fight. It's super powerful. If you're like me, you're probably gonna really want to greed and save it for some insane combination. Its only weakness is that you have to get the Concord. It's completely useless without it. So you want to use it with something like Shaman, Snow Priest to get 3 items. And you need to find nodes where you can actually reliably get that value. I'm very greedy for getting items early because I play with 4 stars and need that power right away. So most of the time I only end up getting 2 nodes by rolling RNG on some less than perfect circumstances. If you're stronger than me with 4 stars, you can hold it on for a bit longer and try to get the perfect circumstances to get 3 items. Of course, it's ideal if you combine it with Hero, go through 6 fights, but that comes up very rarely, so you shouldn't hold out hope that you're gonna get the Hero rune when you see it. My advice is just burn it the first time you can eat 3 items with it. That should get the most consistent value. And now we're on the green stuff. Gain 8 ingots when entering a node, and the Concord effect is gain to hope. This feels like a better version of this rune, since it also gives you a bunch of money, and you can turn the money into hope into a shop anyway, with a bunch of items. On paper this sounds good, but I find myself using it very rarely. The only combination I can see myself using it is, for example, with some big rune that I don't have a use for. Like combine it with Hero because I have enough combat runes and nothing else to combine Hero with that has some insane value. That's usually how I end up using it. Most of the time it just stays in my inventory until the end of the run because either I have something better to use a big multi-target rune on, or I just don't have the right rune. Like if I have to sacrifice my only removal tool for 8 ingots, that's just not worth it to me. So even though it's good on paper, it ends up staying in my inventory forever. Next we have what's the best green rune by far. Surprise. Turns the selected node into a rogue trader. If you concord it, you also gain a 50% discount. So, you don't always want to concord it, weirdly enough. There is a value that isn't discussed often enough. You can use the shop itself to get rid of a dangerous fight. Like if you're stuck doing emergency march to the dead on floor 5, or you're in a boss queue with some horrible emergency condition, you can just drop the shop on it, remove the fight entirely. Now I really like getting the discount, as anyone would, so that's why I really like this rune, because it lets you delete the combat and still get the discount, a 2-in-1 deal. But sometimes you need to just use it for the removal and give up on the discount. You can always rob the shop anyway. Discounts are for people who aren't thieves. It also has some insane combos, like if you turn every node into a non-combat node with hero, then select all non-combat nodes and you can do something ridiculous. I've played IS4 for probably hundreds of hours and at this point, and I've just never seen that happen to me. So just don't hold out any hope that you're gonna get those. They're insanely rare. Personally, I try to get 2 discounted shops with some combination of green runes, and I just throw it out. I prefer not to save it as my only removal, because the value of the shop is really high. With the discount, you can gain a bunch of items, or even get some other removal rune. But if I don't have any other way to get rid of the fight, I might elect to save it, unless I'm floating a bunch of money and can just buy out the shop twice. Next rage. A 4-star or 5-star temporary recruitment will appear when recruiting operator on the selected node. Concord effect. It has a chance to give you a 6-star temporary recruit. Okay, so I assume everyone never uses this rune. I definitely don't. For several reasons. First of all, it can give me... I play with 4 stars only, right? So if it gives me a 5-star, that's worthless to me. In the same way, if you play normally with 6 stars and it gives you fucking Girl Spirit, are you even gonna take that? Now, I dislike this rune, but the fact that it gives you temporary recruitments has value outside of the temporary recruitments. It still gives you a recruit ticket. So if you have a bunch of E1 operators and you want to E2 them, you might consider this rune just for the extra recruit tickets. It has some value in that sense. You don't actually have to take the temporary recruit. You can just use it as a normal recruiting ticket. So if you have a bunch of hope to burn, it can have some value. Though remember that the tickets are still random. A very unreliable rune. I can see the value in it in some circumstances, but I don't want to rely on it ever. Next we have Doubt. Turns the selected node into a lost and found. This is an insanely good rune for several reasons. First of all, you need a lost and found node for ending 2, and it's really convenient to just carry the ending 2 with you in this rune. That way you can drop it wherever you want. You don't have to bend your path to something suboptimal in order to get ending 2. I like it for that reason alone. The Concord effect is basically it removes one more collapse value, 2 instead of the normal one. This is essentially worthless, I never think about it. I mean, I'll use it if I don't have any other use for a green rune, but I won't ever use it outside that context. Its opportunity cost isn't worth it of spending a green rune. I can use for something else. Like if it's one of the good ones, obviously. If it's a select one non-combat node, I'm happy to burn that. But I almost never end up doing that, because I can use the lost and found to remove a fight instead. I almost always use it with the node rune or the combat rune to remove one fight. It's worth noting that you don't actually want to summon multiple lost and founds. There is no reason to do that, because their value is fairly low, unless you want to remove the fights, of course. Just use it to summon the lost and found for the ending or to remove a fight. I love any kind of removal. Having the ending is great. I always want at least one of these in my inventory. Next, doubles the ingots gained from the selected node, and the Concord effect also doubles hope and life points gained from the selected node. Now, this rune is very awkward to use, because in practice you're going to just gain more value from this if you use it on a fight. But it has a few uses. First of all, it doubles the ingots from literally any source. You can drop it on a shop node, take money out of the shop, and that will give you double the normal money. If you buy items from the shop that give you hope, life, or ingots, you get double the normal. So you can gain value with this rune. It's not terrible. The only question is whether it's actually worth spending the rune combo to actually do it. Because if you're just using it for a fight, you're hoping you get a chest. If you get a chest, it's worth more than the light. If you don't, you're better off using this rune. Personally, I think the best use for this is on a shop, because you can buy stuff that gives you hope, and double shop is instantly going to give you crazy value. On top of a rune like select one non-combat node not being all that useful for anything else. So I'd probably combine it with that to just buff the value of the shop. Though it's still RNG, other than the withdrawing ingots, because you actually need items that give you hope or life points or ingots to get the full effect from here. Unreliable, but can be very powerful. Next, this is the same as Recite. I feel like this rune is, in most cases, just a worse version of the Light. Because if you can actually go through the nodes to gain the Recite effect, well, you just gain more money. Obviously, you can combo it with something like Earth, and then gain a bunch of money instantly, especially on the 4th floor where you have 3 non-combat nodes right at the end. But I don't see myself spending an Earth rune on just such an effect. I'd probably try to save it for some shop combo. Or the other one, Love. Turn the selected node into an encounter. So this is great on its own. It can remove a fight. If you use the Concord, you get a Wish Fulfilled instead, which is a guaranteed item. The Concord effect is pretty good, but don't shit on the encounter. Encounters can be the same value, or even higher than a Wish Fulfilled. They are unreliable and can give you a very dangerous fight instead that you're forced to skip. So it obviously depends on your strength. Or they can give you like 2 hope or something. But you don't always have to use it for the Wish Fulfilled. Encounters can be valuable if you just want to, because you can get like the Broken Gitano item from them. That said, the fights you're going to replace with encounters will probably have a higher overall value, unless you already have a fully built squad. So, if you don't want to avoid fights, I don't think it's worth changing it to encounters. Yeah, I'd say the Wish Fulfilled part is kind of necessary when I think about it. Because if you're going to try to get value from encounters, you need to be able to win the fights. But at that point, you're not using it as removal anymore. So probably just try and aim for the Concord with hitting 2-3 nodes with it. You're then stuck with using it with these garbage runes though, which I really don't like. Which is why even though getting a bunch of Wish to Fulfill sounds really cool, you can only really do that with Earth consistently. With these runes, most of the time you just get 2 nodes. So I don't really ever find myself getting that great value from this one. It's weaker than the shop. Most of the time I just end up using it to remove a fight, whether with the green combo or not. And finally we're on to the blue runes. The declaration reduces co-ops by 2 instead of 1. It also completely reveals the node in case you don't see what it is, based on your devices. The Concord just reduces the co-ops value by 3 instead of 2. I don't care about revealing the node all that much. Like if you're blind and have no devices, you're not gonna get very far just by revealing random nodes. You only have so many of these runes. The Concord effect is mostly what I end up using it, with some otherwise useless blue rune, just to reduce 3 co-ops. I don't just use it at random unless I'm at the boss fight and have no reason to keep it anymore. Usually what I do is I wait until I get some specific debuff I find very annoying, like injury trigger or the reduced DP, and then use it to try and remove that debuff in particular, and then get a different one. This works best on the first debuff, of course, since I think it removes them on the order that you get them. To that end, I usually use it with the Concord effect. One thing you should know is that how much co-ops value it lowers is independent from how many nodes it's applied to. Whether you apply it to every node on the map or just one, it's still only going to reduce your co-ops by 3. Next, I've already talked about Nest. This is my preferred rune over Recite. One particular value is that there's an item that scales with objective shields. If you have objective shields, it gives you a massive health increase. And for that, I really enjoy keeping one of these runes in me, so I can just reset that item if I need to. Mostly I just use it for the objective shields, so I rarely care about the Concord effect. In the sense that if I have to choose between getting this Concord effect or saving the rune to apply it to any other good blue rune, I'll probably just burn it on here. Next we have turning the fights into emergencies. The Concord effect is that it heals you for 2 when you go through the nodes. The Concord effect is terrible and you should basically never use it. Unless you just want to hit those nodes with a blue rune, and by coincidence. The reason being is that if you're leaking lives all over the place and need the healing, you probably don't want to take a bunch of emergency fights in a row anyway. Now, this can be pretty good in and of itself, because you can gain a bunch of items from the emergency fights. Very dangerous, but high value rune. I do like it, but the Concord effect is worthless. Which in a sense is good, I guess, because you don't have to combine it with the blue rune specifically. You don't lose any value by not doing that. Next we have Plunder. Gain 1 ingot, hope and objective shield. And the Concord gives you 1 device on top of that. This is one that you must always concord. It's unless you think you're 1 ingot short of buying an item or something, but that's what we have the shop for. Or maybe you're 1 hope of getting a 6-star. I can see it using it for some desperate situation like that, but even then I'd probably try to hold on to it and just try to get the device instead. Devices are insanely useful. You can use them to get more fights, to see where you're going, all kind of good shit. Ideally you want to combine it with something like Beast and then gain 2-3 devices from it, which is pretty good value for a rune. Devices are a bit hard to come by unless you're playing with the scientific squad. Next we have turning to the selected node into a scout. This is exactly the same as Lost and Found. It's ending 3, so it's good to carry it inside you, because you can choose your path better, and on top of that it can remove a dangerous fight. It's a very flexible rune. The scout node itself is an instant E2, so when you're playing with 6 stars you might just consider using it for that. Like if you really want to E2 some 6 star before the 3rd floor, before the game gets hard, you can just drop this on the 2nd floor. But past that point I'd probably hold on to it for the ending 3, unless you're not doing ending 3 of course. Then you have a choice whether you want to use it as an instant E2 at the end of the floor to avoid any fights, or if you want to hold on to it to remove a dangerous fight. That's up to you. Next, one of the new ones. Turn the selected node into a safe house, and the Concord is increased the life point cap by 2 after the declaration. This is very similar to this in terms of life gain. You can gain 3 lives from the safe house, so it's 1 more, but the cost of that is that it removes the fight, so whatever value you would have gained from the fight, you now lose and just have the safe house. Of course, that's only one side of it. It's also a removal. You can use it to remove a fight you don't want to do. Basically, the question here is whether you want to do the fight or not. There's also some desperate situations where you just need squad limit above anything else, or an E2, and then you gamble on getting those in the safe house, in which case it's higher value. But generally I try to avoid RNG plays. IS4 has enough RNG without us adding more RNG from the runes. So mostly for me this I consider this just in terms of removing a fight and possibly gaining 2 extra lives if I don't have anything better to spend the blue runes on. And finally Migrate. You all know what this is. This is the strongest rune in the game by far. Using it normally gives you 1 device. Now this on its own is actually a fairly powerful effect, as we discussed earlier, but the Concord effect is so broken that you never want to use this fairly powerful effect. When you combine this with the blue rune, it turns the node into a boss key and gives you the maximum number of devices, which is 6. If you have the item that uncaps your devices, it just gives you 6 devices. Now, if you gain this rune and then combine it with one of the 3 runes that can affect 3 nodes, you just win. That's an insane value. You get 3 boss keys. Boss keys are usually a couple of items and fights. That puts you so far ahead of the curve of the difficulty in IS4. You'll be super far ahead and it just gives you a smooth ride. You'll almost certainly win if you get a combo like that. If you don't have any of these runes and you're getting late into the fight, you might just want to burn it on Stone Rune, because doing boss keys on floor 5 is very unpleasant. So if you get to the 4th floor, have nothing better, I would probably just burn it with Stone. If you're more confident than me in floor 5 fights, you can keep hoping to get it in floor 5, but I wouldn't recommend it. Boss keys in floor 5 are insane. Say you get the squad limit, emergency march of the dead, and then you just have to burn on the removals to get rid of it, which also wastes the value of the boss key. So, in short, this is the strongest rune in the game. If you get one of these 3 combos, you just win. A lot of the time you won't, and in that case you just have to accept using it with something like Stone. You can use it with this as well, but I wouldn't do it. And basically never use it for its basic effect. Always Concord. And finally we have the Void Rune. This is just the other part of Scar. Use it for ending 2 to remove a fight. We've already discussed it. Okay, that's about all of the runes. Have a nice one.